The BYU Cougars crying, screaming, throwing up, knock off the Arkansas Razorbacks. What does this mean for the program, Kalani Sitake, and more importantly for me, the Big 12? Well, it is first and foremost, BYU, what you got to do for this league is create the perfect mop-up job. While a lot of people inside the Big 12 were talking about how Cincinnati lost and how Oklahoma State lost, and those are kind of big storylines, Iowa State, you got to steal the show. When we turn on to ESPN, they're not talking about Cincinnati, Miami of Ohio. They're really not talking about TCU and Houston. Most of the conversation was dominated on Saturday night by BYU, going into Fayetteville, Arkansas, and knocking off an Arkansas team led by KJ Jefferson. So I put out last week that Arkansas being without its starting running back, Rocket Sanders, would be a big problem. And all these people were flooding the comments like, oh, KJ Jefferson's the best player in the country. That's how they sound. I was born and raised in Arkansas. That's how we sound. And guess what happened? KJ Jefferson was not the best player in the country on Saturday. BYU took advantage of great field position very often. The total yardage thing, the more that I dug into it, the more I'm like, oh, yeah, no, total yardage doesn't matter. It lies a lot. And BYU took advantage of every mistake that Arkansas made, forced mistakes as well, and made the big plays at the end. Mounted two comebacks, down 14-0 after that big return. I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's not good. And BYU won, cementing itself this season as a contender even further. Now, what we've been asking, is this BYU team for real? They've beaten up on a couple of bad teams. They didn't look great doing it. Now, BYU went on the road in an SEC night environment. The one thing that we're told should keep us up, should keep us awake, that we should be worried about is the SEC at night and how these programs, BYU's too small, and these players in the elevator were cocky and puny and tiny. And guess what? The Cougars, the Big 12, now the Big 12, walked into DWR on Saturday and won a football game. Ugly at times, for sure. Defensively, there were a couple times where I thought, oh, BYU, but bragging on the defense a lot. But overall, plenty enough to win against a very high-powered Arkansas offense. Told you, Danny knows. Danny knows, their offensive coordinator, not scared of him. Kalani Sitake owned the Arkansas Razorbacks on the road in Fayetteville. So again, what does this do for the conference? It's big. Mop-up job. Whoo! Marked safe from total embarrassment this week. Think about this. There are very real scenarios where West Virginia loses to Pitt, BYU loses to Arkansas. Those are two very possible things that could have happened on Saturday. Had that happened, I don't know. I would have just had to delete the podcast. I wouldn't have a podcast anymore. I would just join Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On Pac-12 and we would start our own podcast. Locked On Sad. And we would just talk about how sad we are. Thankfully, BYU, West Virginia too, mop-up job, highlight something good, and beat the SEC. From a conference standpoint, the Big 12 just went on the road, beat the SEC. We showed, hey, look, while some things might be bad, while we might have some teams on the lower end of this league that are reeling right now, we also have teams like BYU who you're going to overlook who can still get it done in college football. From a program standpoint for BYU, Kalani Sitake, this is a Kalani Sitake guy. This guy who, over the last 2 years, there have been those weird murmurs of, is he the guy to get it done at BYU in the Big 12? There have been people who question him, his coaching staff, and whether or not his seat at times is getting warmer and warmer. That has been a real conversation for folks. I've seen a lot of that on social media. Kalani Sitake just proved, hey, look, I'm still that guy. I'm still the guy that when we lose a game, we can roll in the next season against the same team and beat that team. We can adjust. I am the guy who can help this program adjust and grow into the new Big 12. BYU might get beat around by a couple teams this year. This team might still finish 8-4, but those 4 losses they take, when they meet those teams again next year, you best bet BYU's going to give them a run for their money. Absolutely, because that's what Kalani Sitake does. It's what he's been doing. I am wholly impressed with what BYU did on the road. The mounting 2 comebacks as well. And from a program standpoint, this is your first defining win in the Big 12. BYU, this is your defining win early on in your Big 12 tenure. And there aren't a lot of other teams in this conference who can say they have that. Houston doesn't. They beat UTSA, not a defining win as a Big 12 team. Cincinnati beat Pitt on the road, as we've learned now, that they lost to Miami, Ohio. I don't know if that's really their defining win of the Big 12 era. UCF has not got a great crack at anybody in the Power 5. That road Boise State win, not a defining win of the Big 12 era. BYU just beat an SEC team on the road and said, look, we deserve to be Power 5 for a long time, and here's what we got. We're good. Yeah. And other teams in the Big 12, especially those that are struggling, most teams in the Big 12 actually, going, that's not good. That's not good. So BYU, you're good. Can you do it again this week? Can you win again this week? We'll break all that down later on. This has been It Always Will Be. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Locked On. Thanks again for making it your first listen every single day. Doce Grande.